welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host Kushalmehra. All right, today we're going to talk about another book. Today's book is called A Dalliance with Destiny, and I have with me the author of the book, Aman Singh Maharaj. Aman, welcome.
Hi Kushal, hi listeners, namaste and my pranams to everyone.
So, Aman, there's a tradition in the podcast. Every time I start a podcast, especially when the guest has come for the first time, I request them to tell my viewers, or there is an audio version also. So I have to pay full respect to the audio only listeners, to the listeners also. That the guests tell everybody a little bit about themselves, because I was going through your bio in the book itself, and it says you have an avid interest in anthropology. So maybe you can tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and then maybe we can do some talk about anthropology then.
Sure. So, just a sort of boring stuff first. I'm an engineer. I don't know if that sounds boring, but I'm quite left brain.
Most Indians are engineers. So it is Indians are like Hamara Banda.
Yeah. So look, I'm also an economist. After my engineering degree, I did an MBA and a PhD in economics. So I'm a bit of a mix. And then in the last, I think, 10 years, I don't use any of my qualifications. I've just become a businessman. And I travel a lot. And the writing is more of a passion for me, along with anthropology. So you'll find a lot of cultural stuff in my writing itself. Well, so far it's just in India and South Africa. But as I get to write more, you'll probably find other cultures being absorbed into my writing as well.
So, Aman, were you born in India or born and raised in South Africa? So which variety are you?
So I am a South African Indian. So I am fourth generation. I am of Indian origin in terms of race.
Keshav Maharaj, just like Keshav Maharaj.
Just like Keshav Maharaj.
The cricket player. See, Indians understand cricketing analogies.
Yeah. Every Indian in India associates South Africa with cricket. So I'm trying to change that.
Man, they had one of the best teams. The best teams.
Yeah, they've had a very good team since 1992, I think. It's just when they go into the finals, they tend to choke sometimes, but they're pretty good.
Yeah, that's true. But okay, so if I was to ask you a little bit about your experience, you said you're a fourth generation South African now. I'm going to treat you like a South African of Indian origin. So if you don't mind, because I think that's what you are, and that's how you should be treated, and that's only fair. But so how was it, if you don't mind me asking, being a fourth generation Indian living in South Africa, and how was your experience when you would come to India?
So, Kushal, I'm not the benchmark for the traditional South African of Indian origin, because I've been to India since 1981, and I identify more with India than with South Africa. Even though I've spent nearly 50 years of my life in South Africa. To give you an example, I support the Indian cricket team, not the South African cricket team, despite the fact that there's Keshav Maharaj, who has my surname, and he's playing in the South African team. It's just the way I'm wired. We've got about 1.2 million Indians in Durban itself. So with the highest concentration of Indians in one city outside of India. There was a stage where South Africa had the highest number of Indians in the world outside of India. But then, India has this love affair with England and with America, so you find a lot of Indians have emigrated there. So we know more the world's lead in terms of that. But if you come to Durban, you'll think it's a mini India. We've got Gujaratis, we've got UPites, Biharis, we've got people from Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh. So that's our mix of people in that 1.2 million in Durban.
All right, so you are quite accomplished academically. So what happened here? Like, how did you jump into business then? Like, usually, you associate people with a PhD. Eventually, they're going to be like, I'm going to be a professor. They get into academia, or you have a background in economics. So you might end up in economics, let's say policy making or things like that. How did you jump into the business world then?
So I was quite involved in policy making at a government level, but I'm not going to be bashful. I'm not going to lie. The truth is, I didn't like reporting to someone. I wanted to be my own boss, and sometimes reporting to people who may be less talented than you can be a very aggravating thing. And the truth of it is, I wanted to make money, and you're not going to make the kind of money I would like to have made as a salaried person. When you're a businessman, this the sky isn't your ceiling on things. So that's why I went into it, and I think I can make a better difference as well as a businessman than being sort of siloed as an employee.
So when did you start your love for anthropology? Because even your bio in the book, like I said, it very specifically talks about it. Your website talks about it. I did go and check your website out too, as I was researching on you, because we don't know each other. So I had to be prepared before I speak with you.
Sure.
So anthropology was something you are quite open about. You mention it in a lot of places. So how did that come up? And if am I right to understand that this book was also about, in a way, your anthropological journey and your experiments with it, in a way?
Okay, so to answer the first part, my interest in anthropology comes from a hell of a lot of reading. I'm 6'4", but I was quite useless as a sportsman. I had brute strength, but I don't have skill or flexibility. So growing up, in the 80s, the only kind of sort of entertainment you had was either sport or reading. TV used to start probably around 7 p.m. every evening. So because I wasn't a good sportsman, I went into reading, and I, was a voracious reader growing up, and that's where you learn about different cultures. I used to read fiction and not non-fiction, and then as I grew up into an adult and I started traveling a little bit more, and I think I've been to every continent in on the globe, and you see the different cultures and the way they celebrate different things. You find the commonalities and you find the differences, and it's all so exciting. Whether it be in terms of culture itself, or architecture, or customs, or whatever the case may be, or even rituals. Then, in terms of whether the book has elements of myself in it, look, I think if any writer who writes fiction tells you there aren't certain aspects of different characters that has you in it, they would be lying obtrusely. The truth is, there are certain events that I've experienced around me, or incidents, but you can't put it there as it happened, or you can't put the character there as being you, because I don't think I'm exciting enough. You've got to put it on steroids. So, whilst there may be events and aspects of your personality in the book, you got to hype it up to the point that it becomes almost unrecognizable. So it's not an autobiography in any way. In fact, the protagonist himself is an anti-hero. So I hope to think that I'm not similar to the protagonist in the book.
So, and I'll tell you why I asked this. There's a very specific moment in the book where I'm just reading the excerpt, where you've written, with Millen trying to subdue the intermittent pain of surfacing childhood memories, they went through the chit chat of meaningless topics for an hour. Horoscopes. I like it. Her hair tended to flatten with the humidity of the coast. A few days spent with her family here, and she was ready to go back to her anonymous apartment upcountry. You really seem to value this whole anonymous thing, he asked eventually. And then this is the bit that I wanted to really read, because I had highlighted this. Quote, I simply need my independence from my parents. I just can't handle that generation and their outdated quirks. When I left home this evening, my mum was rubbing those four-armed goddesses with the vigor of someone possessed, as if any dust on those deities would prevent them from blessing us. She does things like that, and it fucking pisses me off. All she needs is a can of Praso, a flannel cloth, and a few Hindu idols, and she's in seventh heaven. I'm just not into all this shit. I see myself as being more spiritual than religious. What does that actually mean? Spiritual and not religious? Milan asked. I'm just not into all this excessive Hindu mumbo jumbo, you do realize that's quite an elitist statement, right? Your alleged spirituality, it's a cliche to make you feel better than the masses, like you're above them, all their base rituals, which implies that you're somehow closer to God than they are. It all sounds so arbitrary and meaningless. That's really your ego talking, which immediately debunks this whole spiritual tag that you think you may have. This is beautifully written. I thoroughly enjoyed reading this bit in the book, because this somewhere down the line, I can relate to it. Now I don't hide, this podcast is literally called the Charvak podcast. I am a Charvak. I am a Nastic. I have never hidden it. People who come to the podcast also know I am a Nastic, but I also very openly call myself a Hindu. And
Right.
my westernized new atheistic friends, whom I used to hang out a lot in my youth days in the Dawkins forums and stuff like that, they would never understand when I would tell them I'm not like you. And now let's talk about this line. It's very interesting. So recently, literally, I'm not kidding, like I guess 45 to minutes to an hour before I hopped onto this podcast, I'll even tell you the name of the podcast I was listening to. It was Mark Schultz on the Michael Shermer show, and the title of the podcast was called The Good Life Lessons from the World. Basically, world's it calls longest scientific studies, etc., on happiness, blah blah blah. And in that, Michael Shermer, I think it's around an hour and 30 minutes into the conversation, because I would love for people to check that out along with your book too, because it is a perfect parallel. Because Michael Shermer asks the guest about this very line. He's like, what do the people mean when they say I'm spiritual, not religious? So let's talk about spiritual, not religious now. What do people mean? It's like a word they say, it means nothing.
It's basically a bullshit story. That's what it is.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. You're trying to say, you know what? I'm above all this base rituals. I'm on a different path. I'm on a higher path to God. I don't need to do rituals like a havan, or bow before a deity or whatever to link up with God. By doing that, you're trying to show that you are past, the average masses who may pray in rote or whatever it is when it comes to ritualism. But within that, when you're trying to show that you are not just different, but you are higher, it shows ego. And ego itself is automatically not a spiritual thing. So it's kind of contradictory to say I'm spiritual and not religious, because besides being meaningless, it just lays you open to criticism from an intellectual. And I've been on plenty of dates. Kushal, I'm nearly 50 years old. I'm single, and not that I'm marketing myself, but if you look at an average of one new date per month, or maybe every 2 weeks, you do the math. And it's happened quite often that girls have spoken like this, thinking, wow, they're making such grandiose statements. And the first few times I took it. But eventually, you know what? I said, enough of this bullshit. Let me give it back to them, because I don't like meaningless statements, especially when it's said in such an arbitrary way. Because I think you said you're agnostic. I'm very much a practicing Hindu. I don't say it from the point of view of just, what I eat. Okay, that's more to do with being an Indian. But I do my Havan. I may be fourth generation, but I do my own Havan. I have a prayer room in my house that's, according to Vastu Shastra, it's in the northeast. At the entrance of my house, you'll find a tulsi tree. Outside my house in the northeast as well, facing the rising sun, you'll find a janda with the Hanuman flag. So maybe I'm just too traditional and the world has changed. But trust me, I can become very, very vicious when I hear things that are not exactly kosher in my mind. And as I'm talking about Lord Hanuman, there's a whole group of monkeys playing outside my house, if you wouldn't believe that.
Yeah,
How's that for a
but
coincidence?
yeah, and this is true. Like, people say things that sound profound, but they actually mean nothing. And it comes from this incessant need, especially, in circles. Like, I'll tell you, a good friend of mine. So I think this is how modern Hindus cope with having faith. I'm very serious. And this is where I'm coming from. I'm very comfortable in my disbelief and still being a Hindu, because
Yeah,
the culture I belong to has a place for
is
that
Hindu.
too. But what I noticed in a lot of my friends, so obviously I'm not going to take the name here, but I clearly remember. So I'm part of this badminton group in the local gymkhana. We play badminton, and once we were having this chat, and a dear friend of mine in the group actually came up to me, and we were talking about religion and this and that, and they're like, no man, I'm not into rituals, I'm just spiritual, I'm not religious. So they have reduced religion to
To rituals.
ritual. And yes, and they have reduced ritualism itself per se to something, very useless. So we were in a sport gathering. So what I did was, I just asked them a very basic question. I was like, so I was just, we were practicing for a inter gymkhana tournament. We every year in December, the gymkhana where I am a member of, we have this tournament. So the badminton group has a tournament. So I said, so, we are playing doubles. Yes. So in doubles, before we go to the match, sometimes as a team of two, we join hands and we give each other a pep talk before getting on to the badminton court. They're like, yes, we do. I was like, what do you think that is? And that person had no answer. I was like, don't you think that's a ritual we do to focus, to get ourselves pumped up before we go and go into the battlefield as such at that moment of time? I was like, so why is that ritual better, and a religious person, let's say, pouring water in a certain direction or doing XYZ, demeaning? And now tell me, are you spiritual and not religious? And that person said, no, I guess I'm religious too, just in a different field.
It's just ego. Yeah, exactly. I mean, everything you do is ritualistic. That is how we are basically. I'm not just talking about religion, it's exactly as you're saying. It involves every aspect of our life. I think maybe just people think it's cool to say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. And it's just a meaningless statement, totally meaningless statement. And it's bizarre that quite a number of people out there say that. I haven't picked it up in India. I've picked it up in South Africa. Maybe our female of our race group is a generation ahead, and I say ahead in inverted commas. It doesn't necessarily mean a better thing. So they use terms like this, terminologies.
But I think in India you'll find this more and more now. It depends on which circles you hang out in. But yes, I think circles in which the pressure of secular thought is a little more, uh, it exists more. And in circles where the pressure of secular thought is less, it exists less. So if I was to put it down in the bare bones way, this friend of mine leans left, but still wants to retain, their faith. So I guess that's how they cope with it. Which in
Yeah.
my case, there is no coping mechanism. I am what I am, and I'm comfortable the way I am. And I'm sure they are too, but I just found this spiritual, not religious, kind of hilarious. Now, another bit in the book, where uh, again, and I'll tell you why I'm reading this, is because it kind of relates to there is a pattern in your book where I don't know, I sense there is this back and forth jabbing between two cultural entities, right? One is saying, smash the thing out of you, and the other is saying, no, it's just, what are you talking about, man? You're just looking at it in the wrong way. I get a sense that that's a pattern in your book. So I'll read this bit again. This is further down ahead, where you say, she had already begun heaving with his words, responding breathlessly, defile me, fuck the English out of me. In one deft movement, he swung her around, entering her with contrived anger from the rear, forced to oblige her fantasy. He heard the voice of the ultimate cuckold, Lord Louis Mountbatten, in his head as he rutted into Kimberly. Do it for England, villain. A perhaps falsely hero worship soul, once a prime minister in England during World War II, now lounging about in purgatory in his Hamburg hat that sat atop a pudgy face as the powers that be debated as to whether he was good or bad, heard Milan's grunts, not too happy about the matter. Quote, why was this beastly Indian chap creating a scandal in this fair English maiden's bum? Isn't just it just isn't cricket all this buggery? Standing on the wooden floor, calf muscles coiled, brown arms thrusting towards a pink one at frenetic speed, and Kimberly's howls of delight in sync with each inward plunge. Millen punctured himself on a battlefield, valiantly defending himself against red coat soldiers. So, where do we start? Do we talk about how dare you go to someone of us? That angle? Because you punch so many people in these 2 3 paragraphs. You're like, in the Hindi में बोलते हैं ना, तूने हमारी बंदी ले ली kind of a thing, या तूने हमारा बंदा ले लिया. How dare you? तेरी औकात नहीं पता तुझे kind of a thing. How dare you cross the line? Is that the thing? Or the thing is, it was as if it was not enough that they took our cricket away. Now they're taking everything else away. So let's start. How did you come up with this wonderful word?
So, I blame a lot of the social ills that plague the world. I blame it on colonialism. I don't think we should use it as an excuse to allow the world to become any worse. For example, in South Africa, we, like India, we are victims of colonialism and apartheid. But at the same time, India has now gone beyond that and is striving. It has hit double-digit growth at certain times. In South Africa, we're still far behind, and we are using colonialism as an excuse for us not to grow. At the same time, colonialism is the source of all the problems if you dig deep enough. And one of the people who gets hero worshipped in history is Winston Churchill. He's the guy who wore the Homburg hat. And he was the one who referred to Hindus or Indians as a beastly people with beastly religion. So I'm actually hinting, or I'm being a little direct actually, that I'm referring to him. And it's to say, you know what, to hell with you. We have now entered the realm. Maybe we may have taken cricket from you, but you took 45 trillion US dollars from India over those 200 or 300 years. I'm not sure about the exact time period. There's also a hint towards, if you know Durban well enough, or if you know South Africa, there's 3 big cities in South Africa. There's Johannesburg, which is your sort of the powerhouse of Africa. It's the wealthiest city in the whole of Africa. There's Cape Town, who everyone knows. It's one of the most prettiest cities in the world. I rank it in line with Rio in terms of beauty and, it having Table Mountain. Durban, where I stay, is the poor cousin. People who can't afford a really top holiday or top-notch holiday come to Durban because it's cheaper. You want to buy a cheap meal, there's lots of Indian eateries that provide you with Indian food at a very cheap price, and you get all the sort of lower middle class people who will come to Durban because they can afford it. Durban is also very segregated. Johannesburg is a melting pot because it has all the head offices so all the top-notch people go there. And because you are not staying with your family, your colleagues becomes your friends, and that cuts across the racial lines. So in Johannesburg, you'll see lots of mixed race couples. You'll see the same in Cape Town, because Cape Town is an international city. It's has the most number of tourists. So you see a lot of mixed couples coming into the city, and you see a lot of people from Europe, white people who are into this whole exotic, I want to be with another race kind of thing, whether it's romantically or if it's only for just a brief moment or for the holiday itself. Durban's different. Durban's very segregated. So you'll find, like, if you go to a nightclub, there'll be an Indian nightclub, or there'll be a African nightclub, or there'll be a white nightclub, meaning it's not based on any legislation anymore, but it's based on people's preferences, because we're a family-led environment, so we tend to go out with our family. Our friends tend to be from our own race. Over and above that, a lot of the, I won't say the Afrikaners, they are regarded as white, they are of Dutch descent, but you get the English who are still over the generations who look at Indians as being sugarcane workers who came here. They haven't gotten it out of the mindset. So you could be the most beautiful Indian man and they could find you beautiful, but they would not necessarily date you, even if pound for pound, flesh for flesh, the man may be better looking than the white woman, the Indian man may be better looking than the white woman, which is an example that comes from this book, A Passage to India. I don't know if you ever watched the movie, if you didn't read the book, by A.M. Foster, where it's said in court that an Indian man, I think he was a doctor, had allegedly raped a white woman in India. And the court, his lawyer said, but what happens in the case if the Indian man is better looking than the white woman? Why would you assume that he raped her? Now, it's a similar thing I face here in the sense, or not I face, I think, we see here where the darker the race, the less attractive they may seem to the fairer races at a social level. So people won't admit, you know what, I'm attracted to the darker races. They won't admit it in a public forum because it's still a very segregated city and we still have these hierarchies. But behind closed doors, there are lots of other things that happen. We had a whole new race that came about in South Africa called the colored race that came about from the mingling of black and white. So it's that sort of whole passage that you just read is basically a big up yours to all the racist people who don't want to show the reality of what they're attracted to, especially in Durban. And it's also a big up yours to the English for their colonizing ways and destroying, countries in totality. I mean, India still faces the whole sort of drama it has from partition because if you get those incursions coming in from Pakistan. And it's all because of colonialism. They redesigned the boundaries. It should never have happened, but it did. So that's what that passage is all about.
So you'd say this again ahead in the book. It was fated as my takdeer to have not been born in India in this lifetime, but hopefully I would at least get to die in the succor of her bosom. For my flesh was made up of the soil of India, and in my arteries flowed the Ganga. Obviously, you say things like India beckoned with her treasures of philosophy, architecture, intellectualism, civilization, benevolence. So, is this is this a struggle many Indians face? Look, Aman, I cannot relate to this. I live here. Sometimes
Yeah.
I don't. I mean, I can because I have lived outside India too. So in a way, I get it. I get when people say things, and I'm not saying this is you trying to share your thoughts. Maybe it's just a character, and you're just stating what the character is feeling over there. But on a larger scale, I because when I meet a lot of people, there is this craving. People miss India. People miss the civilization. But like a person like me, just last year I was out of India for 4.5 months, and I'll be the first one to admit I missed Indian food a lot. Because I really like Indian food, and you just get shitty Indian food in North America. I don't know what the hell they cook. That abomination is not Indian food, what they call Indian food. Sorry to my Canadian and American viewers. I mean, I don't know what you guys eat there. That's not Indian. But you miss in a very weird way. You miss the sound also at times. Your senses are on hyper alert in India. Like that famous Russell Peters joke. You come out of the plane from Canada to India, and all your senses are on hyper alert. And the sound, action, everything is there around you. So is that yearning or self discovery now a thing in the diaspora? Because I rarely find it, especially in second generation, third generation Indian kids. Now you're a fourth generation Indian origin person from South Africa. This is rare to read a person writing a book mentioning something like this. I'm not saying zero in North America, but in the Western world, which is formerly known as the West now, this is very rare.
Yeah. Like I said, I am not a benchmark for the average Indian. I'm the kind of person, when I went to India first in 1981 and I landed there, I fell in love as a 7-year-old kid. I loved the smell. Those days, we used to all land in Bombay to Saha Airport. As soon as you land in Saha Airport, those days, you get the smell of the open sewer system. In some strange way, I loved it. I identified this with Bombay. It was my first international trip. And with that smell of the open sewer system, there was a smell of the dabas and those lovely pav bhajis and all the pani puri and so forth. It's a pav bhaji has more of the sort of fragrance for me. Um, and I identify with India because I've been to India so many times. I like a little bit of filth. Don't send me to a Dubai. I've been to Dubai many times. Yes, it's lovely, it's modern, it's glamorous, but I like a little bit of filth, a little bit of smell. Um, I don't like some sort of antiseptic, sanitized place that I need to go to. I love the noises. You land in Bombay, it's, the taxis, well, in those days it was the black and yellow Fiats, tooting their horns all the time. And it still goes on with the other cars. And same in Delhi and all the big cities. At the same time, it's the intellectualism that I get in India. I could speak to a taxi driver in India in my broken Hindi. It takes about a week for my Hindi to kick in once I'm in India. And they can give me a whole philosophical discussion that I cannot possibly get even with an educated person in a hurry in South Africa. It's just the way it is. And then, this is the cliche. People are happy in India. The people living on the streets are happy. They're smiling. They're not sad. They're not angry. They've accepted their lot in life. And to me, there's a great amount of spiritual advancement in something like that, that you have accepted your lot in life. So it's the whole hustle and bustle that attracts me. And yes, if you look at the house that I'm staying in, you're probably not going to get that in India in a hurry. I'm probably upper middle class in terms of South African living, maybe even more. But in India, I would not get that kind of lifestyle, for the same amount of money because property is so expensive. In South Africa, we also live a very colonialist lifestyle, just like India, because labor is cheap. It just is what it is. Life is very easy. Yet in America and England, where a lot of people from India, think that that's the idea, that's the ideal place to be in. They have to clean their own toilets. Whereas in India, the middle class has not just servants; they've got drivers, they've got access to chefs or cooks to do their cooking. They've got their kitty clubs and they've got their servants to go do their buying and so forth. So it's a bit bizarre for me. What do they see in America and the USA that they cannot get in India? Anyway, you've got gated estates in India. In fact, I wanted to move to Pune at one stage. I'm still considering it because it's very much aligned with South Africa in terms of its lifestyle. If you go to the east of Pune, the new areas. So generally people in South Africa, Indian people in South Africa who have not been to India, when you mention India, they start thinking of absolute filth, smells, and discomfort. They don't know what India can offer, but the people who have been there know. And you get two types of people. You get the person who goes to India and falls in love with it, and you don't have to be Indian to fall in love with India. Or you get the person who goes to India and absolutely hates it. I've had friends who landed in India on a Friday and then just changed their flights and came back home on a Saturday because they just couldn't handle it. It was such a culture shock. So, in no way am I indicative of the average Indian, but there are a few of us around who hold India very dear to our hearts.
Now, another theme, again, I'm going to read this, you have said, and this is again, a very, this is a very internal desi problem that you have touched upon. And this is between what we famously, we are called fobs and y'all are called confused desis, right? That is the standard back and forth that we have amongst each other. So in this place, yeah, it's very interesting. You use the immigration official as the example where you say the nighttime immigration official was surly, sullen, and swollen like a boxer who had been walloped continuously on his face. He didn't bother to look at me, expecting me to speak Hindi simply because I looked Indian. I explained to the official my linguistic limitations in some sort of pidgin version of the vernacular. He looked at me and shook his head in disgust as if to say, quote, "These foreign Indians are totally cultureless." I, this is a very good point that you have raised. A lot of times people don't understand that, like you said, you are the exception, you're not the norm. You yourself say you are the exception, not the norm. I think at times Indians in India are very unfair to, Indian kids or Indian origin children. They're Canadians, they're Americans, they're South Africans, they are whatever, they're British. They are what they are. They did not decide where to be born. Their parents moved,
Yeah.
and they are born there, and they immerse themselves into their culture. They could be very Hindu, they could just not speak an Indian language. They could maybe read the Sanskrit bhajan or the Sanskrit
Yeah.
shloka, but they still may not speak Hindi or Tamil
Hmm.
or Telugu or Kannada, whatever, Marathi. I'm from Maharashtra. And, these cultural fault lines sometimes are unnecessary between, people of Indian origin. They are reducing. Like, I'll give you my experience. When I moved to Canada to study in 2001, this was way more. It was clear the gap between Indian origin kids born and raised there. They would hang out more with the white Canadian kids or the white American kids. They would relate more to them. Let's be very clear, they just could not relate to Indians or Pakistanis for that matter. And us, we would hang out more with Indians and Pakistanis than Indian origin kids who are born and raised in Canada. We just could not relate to them. Now, I go back to Canada again and again, and I see the difference now. The gap is bridging. We have served bridged certain gaps. I think we have become, we as an Indians from India, first gen immigrants going over there, have kind of reduced that hostility of, अरे यार इसको तो हिंदी नहीं आती यार, इसको साइड करो यार, कौन बात करेगा पूरा टाइम अंग्रेजी में, kind of a thing. And they have also stopped mocking us for our idiosyncrasies. It was very weird at one point of time. This incident has stuck in my head. I expected a white guy to do this with me. An Indian kid born and raised there did this with me. It's like, do you guys have Mercedes in India? I was like, and I was like, why are you doing this to me? And then in my head, I was like, do I insult him? Or do I just let go of this issue and move on? And I just, then I was like, yeah, we have magic carpets and elephants too. To basically send him a message that, look, you're not white, so stop being like one. And don't pretend that you don't know enough about India. I mean, you know a little bit about India. That kind of thing. Like, you expect Indians, white people to say, oh, you guys had Sega and Atari. I mean, what do you mean we had Sega and Atari? Obviously, we had Sega and Atari. Everybody played video games if they could afford it. So what do you make of your experience? Because it's not just me raising my grouse, because I think Indians can be nasty to second and third generation immigrants too. And I've seen that nastiness, towards
Yeah.
second generation immigrants over there too. So what do you make of this entire, mini divide that we have amongst ourselves?
So, look, I'd like to think it's not a deliberate attempt to be nasty. I think it's based on a lack of understanding and a lack of knowledge. Because what you are talking about is something I've experienced very much in India, and I still experience. And I've experienced this from 1981, and now we are in 2023. I just came back from India on Sunday evening. So I'm still fresh with the experience. And, I had a whole number of literature festivals that I went through. So one of the sort of chapters in the book, I don't know if you've read through the whole book, it's set in Bombay, where the character is at a wedding and he tests out a girl's reaction to him. And her name is Mamta Chawla in the character in the book, to see whether there's an attraction for a South African man or a man from Africa. And he holds a conversation with her, and she preems because you can see she's trying to get married, and that happened to me. I was just testing the whole reaction to how people are with regards to Africa. And when you look at the matrimonials in India, they'll have something for green card. I mean, who has a section for green card? It doesn't make sense. if you think about it, it's quite bizarre. How can you have love based on the geography? So I had a good old conversation with this girl, and she was totally into me, and I wasn't totally into her because I didn't find her attractive, but I was enjoying the conversation because I could see she sensed I was either from the UK or the USA. She was not picking up that my accent is not that of the UK or the USA. And when I eventually told her I'm from Africa, literally you could see the sparkle in her eyes just drain out, because just like how fourth, second, and third generation Indian kids in America and USA may look at you guys with a bit of disdain as if you're a backward. I think a lot of a high society Indian people in India look at Africa as backward. And the moment you say, you know what, I'm from Africa, I'm from those group of Indians that left in the 1860s, they start thinking, you know what, these guys are living in huts and there's lions running around. I'm telling you, the only reason a lot of Indians in India know South Africa is because of, as you mentioned, Keshav Maharaj, is because of cricket. Nothing else. Nothing else. They've never read. You say they don't even know of South Africa as a country. Oh, you're from Africa. Like Africa is one big state. It's not divided into 52 or 54 countries. It just is what it is. It's generally based on, you know what, you want to keep up with the Joneses. So America or USA and England is the ultimate. Forget the fact that, you know what, you've had your bum pampered in Bombay if you're middle class, or in Delhi. Now you're going there, you can't afford servants, you probably lower middle class, and you're cleaning your own toilet, where you've never done something so, I don't know, I say disgusting in inverted commas, in India before. But yet they still want to go there. In India, you may be staying in a nice apartment in a nicer area, but in England, when you move there, you're going into those brownstone houses that are attached to the other houses, which I really don't like. I find there's no architectural marvel about them. I'm the kind of guy, if you can see a bit of my house, I love to have a lot of what you call light coming into my house, and I've never seen that in England. It's very dull and dreary. So it all is what it is. It's a lack of not knowing, and it's about wanting to keep up with the Joneses. That's all it is. We idolize the West and we negate the East, and Africa, is right at the bottom of the pile.
Fair enough. So one thing that I did notice in this entire book was basically a theme of, and this is where I want to close with, a theme of a person exploring his own faith. There are moments where you have those exchanges about conversion with the Christian or anti-Christian jibes. Later on in the book, you talk about those things also. So maybe this will be my last question to you, and we can close at this. What is it to you, as a fourth generation South African of Indian origin? What is it to you to be a Hindu? And that's my last question to you. I think that's where we should end, because I think this book to me was, in a way, a Hindu's exploration in different ways.
Well, on my father's side, I come from a generation of pundits. If you go back as far, they or formerly from Allahabad, and they left in 1860. But if you look at what my ancestors knew on my father's side, they came from the villages. So they were very ritualistic, but they didn't have the philosophy that backed it up, unfortunately. On my mom's side, they were more Arya Samaj, and they were also quite religious, but they also knew the philosophy that backed it up, because my Nana was involved in the Arya Samaj in South Africa. So yes, am I Hindu? I'm very, very much Hindu. And when I visit India as not just as an Indian. I visit India as a very proud Hindu. I go take my darshan at the temples. Whether it works or not, I don't know. Whether there is a God or not, I'd love to believe there is a God. The fact that they might not, or the assertion that there might not be a God, is a very scary thing for me. So what does it mean to me to be a Hindu? I try in as much as possible to have the philosophical understanding of every ritual I do. If I do a Havan, I must understand why I'm doing the Havan. The mantras is supposed to purify the atmosphere. The ghee mixed with the Havan samagri it also sort of purifies the atmosphere, because being human beings, we are always polluting the atmosphere. So there's a very scientific basis behind doing the Havan. So I see myself as a philosophical Hindu. So, Hinduism has four different paths. You can go the path of bhakti yoga, which is love, karma yoga, which is action to the community. You can go hatha yoga, which is compulsion. You can go sit in a cave in an ashram and just pray. Or you can do jnana yoga, which is what works for me, the path of knowledge. So I read voraciously on Hinduism. I've read the Bhagavad Gita and Ramayana a number of times, and I've just bought a 22-volume set of the Vedas because I didn't want to jump into the Vedas straight away. I wanted to understand Hinduism in terms of the interpretation, and that's what Ramayana and the Bhagavad Gita is. It's an interpretation of the Vedas in the story form. Whether it's a history or not, your guess is as good as mine. Some say it is, some say it isn't, but it's about this understanding of what they're trying to convey that's important. Because if you read, the Ramayana versus the Ramcharitmanas, and they're written, I think, about 5,000 years apart, they're vastly different. But the essence of the story is the same. And yes, I'm Hindu. I've been a vegetarian now 29 years, and I still miss meat. To me, a person who eats meat and gives it up is like a recovering alcoholic. The danger is always there of you going back, because to me, nothing tastes as nice as meat. It has a certain chewiness. Gives you a sense of satisfaction that maybe vegetarian food may not. So you tend to eat a bit more of the vegetarian food because you miss the taste of meat. You're not satisfied. But my conscience dictates to me, if I cannot kill it, then I cannot eat it. Right? So I got to live with the elements of with the dictates of my conscience. Some say Hinduism favors vegetarianism. Some says it leaves it open-ended. I'd like to believe it favors vegetarianism. So I try to follow Hinduism as long as it aligns with my conscience. Then I accept it. So that's it in a nutshell. Yes,
Fair enough.
I'm a.
Fair enough. Aman, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you. But before we wrap everything up, so what's next after this book? Are you going to dabble with fiction again, or maybe non-fiction this time?
I really thought I want to be a one-hit wonder, but my publicity agent and a whole number of people are insisting that I must write another book. I write quite a few articles. I've just started writing articles internationally. I've done one on cricket, not in as much about cricket, about more about the social issues related to cricket between India and South Africa. So that was published, I think it was in the Guardian in India. And so I'm going to do a lot more articles, and I'm thinking about a book right now. Writing doesn't pay the bills. In fact, you lose a lot of money from writing. You do it purely for the passion. And for me, it was also for my ego. I wanted to become well known. So that's one of the other reasons, besides the passion for writing. So it's most likely I am going to write another book, but I just need to figure out what's the theme, and then I'll go forward. I don't need to plan what it is. Once I know what the theme is, it unfolds for itself. So hopefully
All
within the
right.
next year. All right.
Awesome. I wish you the best with all your future endeavors. I look forward to reading your work. I'll actually check out your article on cricket. I did not go
Sure.
through this, so that cricket is something that I have a lot of passion about. It is, along with mixed martial arts. That those are the two
So,
sports that I very passionately follow. So yeah, I look forward to reading it. Aman, it was a pleasure talking to you. I wish you nothing but the best, and looking forward to reading your work in the future.
thanks, Kushal, for your time and a splendid interview. You take care and have a good rest of the day for you. Right.
All right, thank you.
That's
All
all of
right,
my
guys.
viewers.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying bye
All
to the
right.
viewers.
Oh yeah. So I'm sorry about that. I just got a delay. All right, guys. We'll wrap today's discussion up once again. If you want to go and check out the description, whether you're listening to the audio version or you're watching the video version, in the description I will leave all the social media links, whether it's Aman's website, the link to buy the book, etc., etc. You can go and check it out. As far as I'm concerned, you know the drill. Subscribe to the Cārvāka podcast YouTube channel, like this video, leave a comment, or if you're on Spotify, iTunes, leave a review, leave a rating. If you want to support this podcast, as you know, this is a member driven podcast, so please become a member. It doesn't matter whether you become a member on YouTube, Patreon, or Fanmo, or you can buy the Cārvāka podcast merch on kushalmehra.com. I'll see you guys next time with another interesting discussion. Until then, namaste, take care, bye bye.